Hello, everybody. Happy 2025. Hope it will be an interesting year. Back in 2024, seems a long time ago, one of our most popular interviews was with an old friend of mine, Marshall Poe. He is the founder of the New Books Network. We did a show back in February of 2024 in which he defended geeky intellectuals. He would do that, of course, because he's the founder of the New Book Networks, which is a platform or a network of geeky intellectuals. And I'm thrilled that Marshall Poe is joining us again as Mr. Geeky Intellectual from the home of geeky intellectualism, Northampton, Massachusetts. Marshall, Happy New Year.
Happy New Year to you. But as I told you, I'm also good with a hammer and saw.
You are. Is that a warning to me in case
No,
I get out of
it's
hand?
not,
You're going to saw me out?
I also know the difference between a machine screw and a wood screw. So it's not totally.
You're everything. You're an intellectual and a practical person. I'm neither. So, Marshall, you've run this New Books Network now for almost 20 years. It's the leading platform, I think, for podcasts about new academic books. What was 24 like for a podcast platform entrepreneur like yourself?
It was a difficult year, I would say that. The primary news for us was actually happened in 2023, and that was Apple changing the way that it does automatic downloads. All podcasts are very sensitive to what the podcast apps do. And when it released OS 17, Apple changed the way that it does automatic downloads in a way that might be good for, I don't know, it might be good for users of Apple Podcasts, but it definitely was not good for us or for a lot of podcasts.
So would it be fair to say, borrowing an analogy from the great power politics, when Apple sneezes, podcast entrepreneurs like yourself get pneumonia or COVID?
Yeah, that would be fair to say. And it did cost us quite, well, I don't know. It meant we had to restructure the company essentially, because there's a large decline in revenue, and everybody felt this. Most of our, I should say also, unusually, most of our downloads do come from Apple Podcasts versus Spotify or something else. So it hit us particularly hard.
It seems, Marshall, as if we're getting two messages about podcasting in 2024. On the one hand, we had this change, shall we say, euphemism in the business climate, which challenging for you as a business in terms of Apple, and probably we'll talk about Spotify as well as another major player. But at the same time, the November election was the podcast election. Men like Rogan had enormous power. So in a broad cultural sense, would it be fair to say that 2024 was a good year for podcasting? It's becoming more and more mainstream, really replacing television in many ways.
I think actually it was a good year for very big podcasts, yes. Actually, it's funny because somebody that I follow, he's a comedian actually, he writes about podcasting sometime, and he had the 2024, 2025 top things you can do to make sure your podcast is a hit. And number one was date Taylor Swift. So that's actually hard.
That's easy. Yeah,
that's hard for most of us. Having Donald Trump on, that probably would help too. But, nothing succeeds like success in media. This has always been the case. And, what has happened, I think I can sensibly say, is that the biggest podcasts have done very well. But the middle and lower podcasts have faced a lot of economic difficulties.
So it's no different from countless waves of the digital revolution. You and I have been watching and writing about this for years. It's not surprising.
It's really not. I mean, it happened with blogs. We know that because blogs, there used to be a zillion of them, and then they turned into things like Slate. And Slate does, I don't know what Slate's doing now, but essentially you see this winnowing in which you're basically competing for ad dollars. And what you need is a really large audience to get those ad dollars. And the audiences of the biggest podcasts tend to grow. And this, of course, starves the middle tier and lower tier podcasts of any revenue. Now, I should say, and this is important, most podcasts are not commercial in any way. The people who run them are not trying to make a living. I'm only talking about podcasts in which people are actually trying to, pay their mortgage. And I would also guess, and I've said this many times, but I think it's true, the number of people that actually make a living from podcasting who are in the content creation side, that is not the owning platform side, is vanishingly small. I mean, it's in the thousands.
Under 10? How many people are we talking
Well, it's in
about?
the thousands, I would say.
So what advice would you give, given what's happened in 2024, to anyone watching this show who's still contemplating starting a podcast? Don't do it?
Don't do it unless you have something in mind other than essentially making a living or making money. Because I think podcasts are great for small communities. For example, if you are really interested, and I'll say this again during the interview about social networks and things like this, if you're really interested in building model airplanes, by all means, start a podcast about building model airplanes. You'll probably get thousands of listeners. You won't get hundreds of thousands of listeners, but you'll get thousands. And those people will find great value in what you do. And you'll find great value in having worked in that community and sort of solidifying and bringing them together and exchanging information. And that's great. And the thing about it is, people don't understand that that's the new part about podcasting. The new part is not Joe Rogan. You don't have to be a genius to realize that Joe Rogan is Johnny Carson for a new generation, or Jay Leno. I mean, there's no question about this. He is. Okay, great. The market can only take one or two of those people. But, there are all these micro communities out there, model airplane builders and people that like koi fish and, I don't know, people that collect brass toys. And sure, go ahead and start a podcast. That would be great. And this community would benefit greatly from that. But you will never make any money. It's not possible.
Marshall, even the word podcasting now seems archaic. I started my first podcast back in, I think it's about 2006. And even back then, it seemed a rather odd word. Keenon's been going now about 15 years. It began as a video platform on TechCrunch, and it's evolved, shall we say, since then. What does the word even mean?
Well, what it means is it's a kind of on-demand content. That's what it is. It's a kind of on-demand content. It's not broadcast, although we're going to come back to that in a second. It's a kind of on-demand content. And, I don't really care what you call it. It's basically on-demand content that's delivered through phones and
so why is it different from what you post on X or Instagram?
Well, it's the RSS feed that makes it different. So the RSS feed has been a great technology or for podcasters. And essentially it means that you can subscribe to a channel or a podcast or whatever you want to call it. We call them channels on the New Books Network. And you can receive, the audio when it comes out on your phone. And that's very convenient.
Is it always audio or video too?
Well, it can be video as well. And as you know, this always amazes me. There was some study done some 6 months ago or something by somebody, I don't know who, that said that a lot of people watch or listen to podcasts on YouTube that have video. And I already knew that because I know people that have listened to Rogan for years. He's on YouTube. They don't watch them. They listen to them on YouTube. But then this caused a great rush. Everybody had to have video. You have to have video for your podcast. And Spotify pushed it. And, a lot of people have pushed it. And a lot of people made the transition. I personally don't understand it because really a lot of the efficiencies of on-demand audio, especially in the podcast, have to do with the fact that there is no video. You can't watch a video and drive your car. Well, maybe you can, but I would recommend it. But we haven't done much video, and we have a very small.
What are your numbers at New Books Network? You get over 11 million downloads a year. It's pretty good.
Yeah, well, this last year we did 11 million, but it really varies, and that has to do with what the podcast apps do. I mean, we've had years where we did 30 million. But then the podcast apps change things.
But it also depends how they count it. So what did Apple do to shrivel your numbers? They just changed the
did, and it was, in some ways, it was very sensible. They said, if you subscribe to a podcast and you don't listen to it for a while, we're going to stop downloading episodes. Okay. That's fair, so it doesn't clog your phone. A perfectly reasonable thing to do, and it might even be good for the industry because you always have to think about what the advertisers are getting. You want to give them value for money, and we don't, at the New Books Network, want to sell advertising to companies that don't actually get the impressions that they're paying for. And so if somebody's downloading a lot of episodes and not listening to any of them, well, the advertisers aren't getting what they paid for. That's bad, right? So maybe it's good for the industry as a whole. It's a necessary correction. I don't know. I just know it costs us a lot. And, you want to avoid a solvency crisis in any business, right? A lot of people went out of business after Apple did that.
A lot of podcasters, because they weren't able to generate the advertising revenue.
Well, yeah, they were heavily dependent on advertising revenue, and they couldn't generate what they needed, and so they quit. And it's hard to blame them. So I'm not asking for charity or anything like that. What I would ask for is a certain amount of stability. Like, let's just keep it the way it is for a while, please. Because if you look at our downloads over the past, 5 to 7 years, they're just all over the place. And the reason for that is the podcast apps are changing the way that they download episodes to subscribers. And I don't understand this. Maybe it's good, maybe it's not good, but it certainly makes it hard to plan, right? Because I have to look into 2025 with the New Books Network and say, okay, we're probably going to get this amount of revenue, so we can probably afford this, we can probably afford that. And we want to improve the user experience, and so we'll spend this money doing that. But now I can't even do that because I don't know what is next. Like, maybe they'll increase the number of downloads, maybe decrease the number of downloads. I don't know, but it makes it hard to plan.
What do you make, Marshall, of the rise of platforms like Substack? I know you have a degree of ambivalence. We're on Substack. I also have an RSS feed, so I'm a traditional podcaster.
Well, of all of all of them, it's probably the one that I like the most. In terms, it's much like a newsletter. It is a newsletter. That's what it is. If you subscribe to Andrew Keen, you get Andrew Keen, and that's all you get. Now, Substack's going to recommend some things to you, but you get Andrew Keen. And that's great. That's one to many, as they say, one to many.
And a simple business model, not relying on advertising, but on the direct economic relationship.
Sure, that's great.
Ask for X a year to support.
Right. I mean, you can subscribe on the New Books Network. It turns out that most people don't want to do that. They want the ads, but there's the option. You can do it. So, with Substack, the thing I like about it is it actually has that one dimension. It's public. You're a publisher, right? The things on Andrew Keen, you're responsible for them. You put them out. You curate them, right? They're not some rando who just shoves something up on YouTube or on X. It's Andrew Keen you get.
Right, and one of the most interesting media businesses that seems to be doing well in 2024 is Free Press, which, according to them at least, have 1 million subscribers. I'm not sure all of them are paying. But are we seeing new publishers now using Substack as if it was the internet, essentially as a walled garden? And Substack, of course, provides all the technological infrastructure, so you don't need teams of IT people to put up your website or social media platform.
Sure, but this is what newspapers already do. I mean, if you read the New York Times online, that's what it is. It's sort of like Substack on steroids, but it's New York Times journalists and opinion writers. It's not.
Yeah, but this way, Tom Friedman, Maureen Dowd, they're still paid by the Times. They could go over to, and this was one of my predictions years ago. It hasn't happened as much as I thought it would. But a lot of people, especially academic superstars, are going over to Substack. Niall Ferguson, for example, and using it as their media platform, and not even bothering to publish op-eds on New York Times or
yeah, sure, and that's in a way that's great. There's another way in which it's not great because it allows for the formation of bubbles. Right now, you may say that the New York Times is horribly liberally slanted and everything that they publish is some sort of crap and so on and so forth. But in the New York Times, you're going to get a lot of different kinds of information put right in your face. And that's probably good for democracy that you get that. On Tom Friedman, you're just going to get Tom Friedman. And I don't know about you, but I already know what Tom Friedman thinks. I'm not going to learn anything.
I'm not sure Tom Friedman actually thinks, but that's
he may not think, but I know exactly what he thinks. And, we have enough of that.
Well, with AI, we could get Dowd and Friedman ad infinitum. I think
yeah.
half their columns are probably produced by AI.
Well, I mean, it's just that, in a way, so and this is the danger of all on-demand media, is that you demand the media that already conforms with what you think.
Yeah, you demand what you already know.
Right. And say what you will about newspapers, local and national and international, at least they sometimes provide different perspectives. The free press, for example, I don't know what, I mean, I'm not a big fan. I think I've told, actually, in our former interview, I said I'm a big fan of the free press. I am not a big fan of what do they call it? Diversity, viewpoint diversity. I don't like that. What I like is objectivity. I want you to put your values aside and look at the data and whatever else it is. Go, look around a little bit, and then tell people what you found, without fear or favor. I'm not a big fan of, just banging on and on about the same thing.
It's interesting, Marshall, that I think there's a broader cultural phenomenon going on here. We do a lot of shows on the music business, and a music journalist wrote a book which we covered last month about people only wanting to hear old music. They only want to hear what they already know.
Andrew, that's me. So you're talking about me.
We live in an elevator with music where all we want to hear are the old hits.
Well, right.
And perhaps the same is true of journalism. We only want to read.
Well, right.
What we already know from Dowd or Friedman,
totally right.
from the Free Press.
I haven't read this book, but I think we probably interviewed the author on the New Books Network, but that author's entirely right. Like, we're kind of the same vintage. So I get in my car and what do I listen to? The Jam, The Clash. Like, this stuff is these are oldies, man.
Yeah.
I haven't listened to new music in I don't know how long.
And in cultural terms, I think this is coming out in the new Dylan movie. I'm not sure if you've seen it.
No, I haven't.
Which presents Dylan as someone as we already know, without any edge, without any challenging, identity.
Well, it's we're pretty simple creatures. We like things that are comforting, which means we want people to say what we already believe and affirm what we believe. And we like nostalgia. We want to be taken back to our youth. Like when I listened to the Jam, man, I was like full of piss and vinegar and I was just nuts, man. I was great. And the Jam, right? All Mod Cons, wonderful. So I listened to that and it kind of takes me back. This is great, And I'm sure that people
on this show, I don't want any nostalgia. Certainly for the Jam.
Well, I don't. Yeah, see, I don't either. I don't either on the New Books Network. I want people to be able to find something new.
So let's look forward, Marshall, to 2025. You've talked about 2024 not being a great year for podcasting because of changes on the platforms, Spotify and Apple. What would you like to see, both as a podcast platform entrepreneur and also as somebody who's very interested in media? You wrote a book, A History of Communications. So your media and society, from the evolution of speech to the internet. So you've always been interested in the digital revolution. What would you like to see happen in 2025?
Well, to depart a little bit from podcasting, I think there are a couple of things which we have not figured out. And just to reference that book on the history of communication, there's always a moment at which a new technology appears and people don't know quite how to use it. And that when I say use it for their own benefit and the benefit of the societies in which they live. There's just a period of learning that goes on where we try to figure it out. My sense is that the key change that we've seen, actually, it's so funny to think about this, but you remember Web 2.0?
I do.
Yeah, I do too. Well, this is what it is. It's user-generated content. We have not figured out what to do with user-generated content.
What do you mean we haven't figured out what to do?
Well, we use these old categories to deal with it, categories that were basically built for print and AV, that is television and radio. So, these categories are things like publisher. Like, what does that exactly mean in a world with X in it? What's a publisher or YouTube? I'm not sure. Or common carrier, like an ISP. What does that mean in a world with YouTube and X? I don't know, and I don't think anybody knows. But there are tangible problems with using this kind of old thinking to deal with these enormous and enormously powerful platforms. You know, the one that I've mentioned to you before is on YouTube, and I didn't know this until pretty recently. There's an astounding amount of copyright violation on YouTube. It is just amazing.
Not as much as there used to be, though. I mean,
Well,
it was founded as the video Napster. I mean, I know
right, yeah, right. Well, it's still actually, it's funny. It still kind of is the video Napster. It's just either it's blatant. That is, they just rip the thing off and put it up. And then if YouTube tells you to take it down, well, you just get a new user account and you put it back up again. No harm, no foul. Or there's this is another concept that just doesn't make sense in our world: fair use. Fair use was designed, as far as I know, for like the classroom. Like, you know, I have this article that I want to, you know, I used to have to explain to people why I use this article and I didn't clear the copyright. It was fair use. I just thought about it. This doesn't make sense in a world with YouTube and X. So we kind of need to think about these things again. So in addition to that, you know, you take X, to go back to this problem with X. X isn't a publisher, right? Because of Section 230. But come on, Andrew, X is a publisher. If you have 4 or 5 million followers, well, you're publishing. That's what you're doing. Like, it's like, let's, you know, use words the way they're meant to be used. You're
so
publishing.
When you say you're a publisher, are you saying that the world's favorite man, Elon Musk, is a publisher like William Randolph Hearst was?
Yeah, no, exactly. William Randolph Hearst. Yes, you know, he owns the platform and he publishes himself. And, you know, I mean, my feeling about this, and this may sound very simplistic, but, you know, the reason that we have these laws about being a publisher is that it makes the publisher liable for what they put into the public sphere. And we kind of want that, right? So if somebody produces something that just says that Andrew Keen is a pedophile, right, and that appears in the New York Times or something, well, the New York Times is a publisher. You can sue their pants off and they won't do it anymore.
Well, if I'm accused of being a pedophile, I hope I don't sue anyone's pants off.
Yeah, that's a good point. Actually, that's funny. So, you know, that's the kind of purpose behind this legal category. And I get that. And I think everybody accepts it. But, you know, the fact of the matter is when you're reaching millions of people, you're acting like a publisher. And there's the thing I wanted to say was it's a matter of scale here. You know, if you run a Google group that reaches 4,000 people that's interested in people that like to model airplanes, okay, that's fine. You're not a publisher, right? But if you reach 40 million, well, that's different. And, you know, the Republic and Marshall Poe and maybe even Andrew Keen have an interest in that. Like, we want to know.
Why is that different? I mean, what's the difference between 4,000 and 40 million? You're still doing the same thing. I mean, what's the difference between New Books Network and YouTube?
Well, because you can destroy people. And it's happened, you know, and you can say things that are just really irresponsible and harmful. The one that comes to mind, and I haven't prepared this, so I'm going to get it all wrong, is I think it was in August this year when everyone's famous person, Elon Musk, wrote on X, "Civil war in the UK is inevitable." And my question was that an exhortation to civil war? I don't know. Was that a statement of fact? Or what was he doing with that? You know, and this is after he had essentially, well, a lot of information about the perpetrator of a particular crime had been posted on X. It was wrong. And he read it. He thought it was right. And maybe later they corrected it. I don't know. But he writes, "A civil war in the UK is inevitable." That's not good.
It's not good. But some people might say, well, he paid $40 billion for the right to own the platform where he can say whatever he wants. So what's the problem with that?
Right. There's right. And free speech and more free speech. That's great. But what I want is responsible speech. Not free speech. I am not a free speech absolutist. And I think anybody who is sort of a nut. There are lots of kinds of speech which we don't like. I mean, I don't want to go into pornography. Like, don't even get started with that.
So how do we distinguish with Musk? I mean, some of the things he says seem to make some sense. Some of it is profoundly offensive. Some of it probably bordering on the illegal. Who's to determine what he can and can't say?
You know, I was going to say, I just have to leave this to people who've thought about it more deeply than I have, and legislators and, you know, law review people. So I don't know. But there just has to come a point at which you exercise such influence that you have to be responsible, or the platforms that publish you have to be responsible for what you're doing. Because that's just, it just makes sense in terms of, you know, the preservation of the Republic. I don't know how else to put it. I don't know where the line is exactly. Is it 40,000 or 400,000 or I don't know. But like it just seems to me they act like publishers. And the problem is not that they act like publishers, but they act irresponsibly. So YouTube allows a tremendous amount of copyright violation up. And nobody's going to go up against those people. As you well know, YouTube employs 1,100 lawyers full time.
1,100?
1,100. Not YouTube, but Google. Google employs 1,100.
You know, I have to warn you, one of those is my wife.
Well, and that's great. I'm sure she does great work, and I'm sure she worries about this crap all the time. but you know, nobody's going to go up against them. It's not a chance. And you know, similarly on X, I mean, people just say things which are just. I guess I think about it like this: there are a lot of trolls out there. I mean, what, like 3 to 5% of the entire population of the United States are sociopaths. That's what psychologists tell us. And so, you know, you take an average 100 people on X, probably a certain amount of self-selection there, you're going to get more than, they're going to be overrepresented on X.
There's at least 10 psychos.
Yeah, I mean, and so you have these people who have no interest in telling the truth. They have no interest in the well-being of their fellow citizen, you know, and they're on there just winding people up. And
but then the other question is, so they do that, so who cares?
Well, I think we should care when it starts riots in England, which is what happened.
Oh, the riots in the north.
In August, yeah.
And I know, Marshall, this is your way as a geeky intellectual of reopening the Pandora's box of Section 230. You think this is the core issue which maybe we should be returning to legally or intellectually in 2025?
I think that we should. But the other thing that needs to be said is this. And I want to be very clear about this. The people that created social media and these other platforms have created a huge amount of value. And they should be thanked for that, right? The people who created Facebook and X and Instagram, people love these things. And they're good things. We want to keep them, but we want to learn how to use them right in a way that doesn't damage individuals or damage the republic. And I don't know the answer about how to do that. But you know, revisiting Section 230, which was, after all, 1996. Think back to 1996, Andrew. It was a different world, right?
Put it mildly, yeah. I mean, in Section 230 was designed to protect internet startups against large media companies.
Right, and now large media companies are like, you know, like YouTube is like the Borg. They just are essentially assimilating everything. And it's hard to beat them, right? They get all the ad dollars. Right. They have all the lawyers, you know, I'm sure they have, God knows how many lobbyists they have in DC, but something, you know, again, I do not want to go at these people hammer and tong. They're our friends and neighbors, right? Especially for you. You live in Silicon Valley or in San Francisco. You're friends and we don't want them to lose their jobs. I don't. I just want them to use these things responsibly. That's all. Nothing else.
So when it comes to 230, would you like to see it turned upside down? Back in May of 2023, the Gonzalez versus Google case, which actually my wife was very much involved with, determined that Google wasn't responsible, for example, with the way in which I think it was YouTube radicalized or supposedly radicalized terrorists to commit outrages in Paris. Would you like, I know you're not a lawyer, Marshall, but would you like to see Section 230 revisited?
Yeah, I think
by the Supreme Court? I mean, basically what they did was back in 2023 was they punted it back to Congress rather than suggesting it was a legal issue, maybe more of a political issue.
Well, I mean, I think it is a political issue. But here's what I would really like to see. And I bet your wife would too. They would like to see Meta and Google and X reform themselves. You know, to think a little bit about what they're doing and how it's good for content creators or bad for content creators, how it's good for young girls or bad for young girls, how it's, you know, it creates extremism or it doesn't create extremism. And to essentially do what the movie industry did a long time ago, and just essentially reform themselves, try to figure this out, because they know it better than anybody. Legislators in Washington don't know shit about it, right? But I guarantee your wife knows everything about it. So they're the people to actually do this work, right? And trust me when I say it'll be in their interest, because God knows, I'm sure that the people at Meta and at Google are shaking in their britches in fear of those companies being broken up.
Well, that's another case with Google, which is not a Section 230 case.
Well, right, but the point is that it's. I think it's just much better that these people, the people that run these companies, are our friends and neighbors. We like them. They produce value, no question about it. They should figure out how to do this. And essentially, I mean, to boil it down, there's going to have to be some sensible content moderation. There is no world in which you can have an absolutely unmoderated thing like X. It's just not possible. So you have to figure out how to do it sensibly. There's no world in which you can allow the amount of copyright violation that occurs on YouTube just to continue. It's not a world anybody wants to live in.
But Section 230 and copyright violation are separate issues. I don't think Section 230 accepts. I mean, it's still with or without Section 230, it's still illegal to post other people's content on YouTube.
Yeah, it's illegal, but essentially, it's when I was growing up, it was when I was growing up, it was illegal to sell marijuana. A lot of marijuana got sold because the enforcement mechanisms weren't. But the point is,
and the law has moved, and now it's mostly
right.
legal.
And that's good. And that's
I wonder whether it's hard to forecast when this is going to happen. But Trump's pick for the FCC chair is someone who's been critical. Brendan Carr has been critical of Section 230. On the other hand, of course, Donald Trump is, so to speak, in bed with Elon Musk, or maybe the reverse. They're certainly in bed together. And I'm guessing that Musk is not a great fan of reforming 230. So might we see a civil war, do you think, in 2025, 2026, within the different wings of the Republican Party on this issue?
Well, I mean, I think it already kind of exists in the sense of, I mean, I'm old enough to remember the moral majority and things like this. So, there's a certain amount, there are some conservatives who are kind of anti-libertarian, and they want to see a lot of essentially content moderation and censorship, sacred Christians and things like this. And then there are other Republicans, it's a big tent, who are like libertarians, and they want to see free speech absolutism. This is already going on. They're discussing these things now. I mean, my question is just, how can we make these things fit for purpose, where the purpose is for people to be able to interact and exchange ideas and say hi to grandma and post pictures of cats and whatever else it is, without, creating a context in which, and this is X, you can lie with impunity and you may reach many people. That's bad. We don't want that.
And I wonder, Gary, whether the bus is left on this. I mean, Google is reinventing itself. We've done a number of shows transforming itself from a search engine company to an AI company. I know you got an interesting anecdote about We, the dystopian novel. You got a friend who told you that all the essays, he's an academic, all the essays that he's getting on Zamyatin's We, one of the great dystopian novels of the 20th century, are all identical. So for better or worse, we're increasingly living in an AI world, which changes social media. So even addressing Section 230 is fighting yesterday's war.
Well, right. I mean, we have to figure out, the amount of material that gets uploaded to YouTube and put up on X, or even put on Facebook, that is produced by bots is probably incredible. And I don't know how much it is. But we have to put our faith in the very intelligent engineers who will find a way to ferret this crap out and get rid of it. I mean, similarly with content moderation, there's already been a lot of, just to give it another anecdote, when I started the New Books, actually about 2012, we used to have comments on the New Books Network. So you could comment on books. And what I found was about 2/3 of the comments were really, really good by people that had listened to the interviews. But about 1/3 of them were produced by those psychopaths we talked about before. They really detracted from the whole experience. So I had to get rid of them. Well, since then, very clever people using AI have found a way to do this content moderation for me. So we have comments again, because it basically excludes people who are acting like lunatics. That's great. I'm all for that. Now, of course, the same AI could be used for bad purposes, and I have no doubt that the Chinese are trying to figure this out as well. Could be for bad purposes, but we want the people in these companies to deploy it for good purposes. And there may be some fix for this, which I don't know about, but engineers are working on, that will clean it all up.
Will AI help you as an owner of a podcast platform? They're all your podcasts on the New Books Network are produced by human beings, but can AI help you in terms of making your shows?
Yeah, it already has in one way.
Better?
Yeah, it has in one way. I mean, I used to tell people, I've been at this for a long time, and we publish a lot of interviews with authors, and I used to tell people submitting the interviews, you can make good audio better, but you can't make bad audio good. And so there were a lot of cases in which I'd say, well, we can't publish this because the audio is crap. Well, there are now tools. Adobe makes one of them, and I am not being supported by Adobe, so this is just me saying it's a good product. The Adobe Vocal Enhancer. It makes bad audio good. And apparently it uses AI to do it. And I'm like, that's great. That's really great. It just makes it clearer. But the thing about it is, and people have said this, the appearance of AI podcasts and AI student papers, and for all I know, AI newspapers and AI expos, makes actual authentic human content more valuable. There's no question about it. If you really want to hear an expert, a live expert, a flesh and blood person who just spent 10 years researching a book on the French Revolution, you come to the New Books Network. Sure, you can go ask Google, Gemini, or whatever it's called about the French Revolution if you want. Great. And it'll spin up something that's probably not bad. But if you want to hear the voice of the actual person that wrote that book, well, you come to us. And so in that way, I think what we do is more valuable. It's authentic. There's a person behind it. There's a book behind it. It's not just out of the ether. And the other thing, I'm sorry to go on for so long, about AI is that it's humans all the way down. AI does not create any content. That is, it doesn't create any knowledge. I should have said that. A human created that knowledge. AI goes and scrapes it and rearranges it and does what is really a kind of fancy find and replace. And then it spits it out for you.
Yeah, digest it. So finally, Marshall, I know you're a big fan of Citizen Kane, one of the great movies. Is that something we should all watch in 2025? What will it remind us, that nothing really changes?
Well, I don't think things change. I mean, I'm a historian, so things definitely change. But this is like, it's very reminiscent of something that's happening now. I mean, and this is not the first time this has happened. Actually, we had a book about this on the New Books Network. Elon Musk is not an elected official, but he seems to have incredible power in the Trump administration. I don't know. Does that sit well with you? Doesn't sit well with me. He doesn't even hold the cabinet position, right? So he didn't have to be, he didn't have to be approved by Congress. Like, what's up with that? And this is supposed to protect us from fascism? Okay, I guess, but it's not. It just seems to me odd that we would,
So we watch Citizen Kane and maybe read Zamiatin's We.
Yeah, I think we should.
A good one book and one movie for 2025.
I think that would be good. Yes.
Well, Marshall Poe, founder of New Books Network, a proud geeky intellectual who is still against Section 230, and I tend to agree, although I won't tell my wife that. I hope 2025 is a good year for the New Books Network. I hope you don't have these podcast hiccups caused by companies like Apple. And I hope, Marshall, again, we will talk before the end of the year. So Happy New Year, and we'll talk in the not too distant future. Thank you so much.